I don't do this often, but occasionally I get a video clip that I think is worth playing, and this one has. There's a reason I want to play this. It shows. Well, let me. All right, let me just set this up. Now, for those of you listening, I want you to listen intently. I'll explain it so you'll hear everything as it goes through. But this is the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, earlier this week after they'd had a closed-door session talking about all the stuff they're trying to push through. It's just kind of comical. So listen to this and I'll explain it.
There are 5 major items we must deal with that we discussed today in the caucus. Voting rights and reconciliation, which we spent the most time on, those two, particularly reconciliation. Appropriations. Oh. Excuse me. Sorry.
Where's your mask?
It's here in my pocket, but I can't talk. I actually, this is a little known fact. After I eat, I sneeze often. All the males in my family do it. So we had a nice meal in there. Okay. Voting rights and it's not a cold, it's sneezing from eating.
So he goes out to have a press conference. He's standing there with some of the other Democratic members, and he sneezes. And of course, in this fearful COVID environment, which actually they were not wearing masks, and so he sneezes. He says, "Oh, sorry." And Debbie Stabenow, another senator, says, "Where's your mask?" And he says, "It's in my pocket, but I can't talk." He can't talk. But then he goes on to say, "It's not a cold. It's not a cold." This shows how ridiculous this stuff has gotten. That he has to go in to explain that all the males in his family, at least he can determine between male and female in his family, that they sneeze after they eat. I mean, it's gotten to the level of ridiculous. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, I want to transition to another topic. I brought this up a few moments ago at the top of the program, actually. According to a new survey, 57% of Americans support a bipartisan solution for protecting religious freedom and promoting LGBTQ civil rights. Now, that's exactly the way that the supporters of the Fairness for All describe their bill. Now, we talked about how the Equality Act, something we've been fighting here and is essentially dead. For now, it never goes away. They'll keep trying. Fairness for All is basically Equality Act light. It's basically the same bill with only a couple of temporary carve-outs for religious institutions, not religious Americans, but religious institutions. But the survey does not necessarily mean that a majority of Americans support fairness for all in terms of what the bill would actually do. Here to explain why is Travis Weber. He's the Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs here at the Family Research Council. Travis, welcome back to the program.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Let's talk about this survey. Now, I've seen it being championed by LGBTQ groups saying that, see, Americans want LGBTQ rights protected. Well, they are protected like everybody else. They just don't have special rights. But what is not revealed in this survey is that when there is a conflict between sexual libertinism and these rights that they pursue and religious freedom loses.
But that's very true, right? So these things like this sound very good. It's a balance. It's a compromise.
Nobody wants to discriminate.
Nobody wants to discriminate. And people don't object to that sound, that kind of language. We're going to balance. We're going to compromise. That's how it's presented. In reality, as you're noting, the balance is very one-sided. And these proposals, such that are being talked about in this poll here, it's being discussed and reported only in the Washington Blade, which is an LGBT publication. Polls like this put forth the idea of fairness for all proposals. They're basically a load of special protections for sexual orientation and gender identity that have very minimal protections for religious freedom. So it doesn't protect religious freedom. It's very important for people to understand this, because if they don't, they go with the idea of the balance. It sounds good. Well, we need to balance in society, and they kind of run with that. In reality, these do not protect and balance these these areas of law. And we have resources showing just how radical these proposals are and how out of balance they are.
Before we get into the core of the Fairness for All and what it would actually do, I want to another question on this survey that was released. I think it's only reported by the D.C. I think it was
The
the
Washington
Blade,
Blade, yeah,
which
and-
is an LGBTQ publication. You know, I've been doing polling. I've done polling. I've read a lot of polling. And what you do is you want to look at the methodology. You want to look at the questions that were actually asked. None of that data is available, is it?
It's not available. We don't know the questions. We don't know how they were framed. I can tell just looking at this article that it's likely framed in a slanted way: equal access for health care, protection from discrimination, and they're showing numbers in the 70s. Well, no one's gonna come out and say, well, we want people turned away from the door, and that's what these issues are not about. They've never been about that. In reality, they're about protecting religious freedom of people like Barronelle Stutzman, a small business owner who doesn't want to be forced to create floral decorations for same-sex weddings. Even the polling's own language, though, if you look at the language here, showing numbers in the 70s for the equality language, and then numbers in the 50s for religious schools should be able to have religious codes of conduct, 55%. That's a core element of religious freedom, going back to the First Amendment. So you're telling me that your poll got a number of 55% support, 45% oppose that? That shows me right there it's not an accurately framed question, because we don't have 45% of Americans opposing a fundamental First Amendment
we've
freedom.
actually seen the polling that reaches up to 80% when it comes to Americans' freedom to believe and act according to those beliefs.
Right. And you have, there's other polling. Even a few months ago, an Equality Act poll was done, finding that 11% of respondents said that man-woman athletic competition should be banned, 74% saying they shouldn't, 7% saying we should abolish the sex distinctions in women's prisons, domestic violence shelters, 82% saying they shouldn't be abolished. Yet those policies are an issue. Those are the policies that will be affected by Equality Act and Fairness for All type bills.
All right, we have talked extensively in the past about the Equality Act, which so bad it did not move in Congress, but folks don't think that just because it didn't happen this time, it won't happen next time, because they don't. That was the thing with hate crimes, which is really set the stage. It was the first domino to fall, and they worked for that years and finally got it through. So they never go away. They'll continually come back. So you need to be vigilant, and this is one reason you should download the Stand Firm app, because when these bills come up, we'll give you an alert if you want it, and we'll give you the action items to take, who to contact. We make it very easy for you to be involved in your government. I mean, our republic, as I've said before, was made only for participants, not spectators. So download that Stand Firm app. All right, let's talk about this Fairness for All. What is in it, and what would it do, and what is the key distinction between it and the Equality Act?
Tony, the easy way to think about this is basically it is the Equality Act, except it doesn't push abortion. The Equality Act actually does, and it has slightly more protections for adoption providers' religious freedom by setting up a tiered system that allows some of those faith-based providers to operate according to their freedom, whereas the Equality Act would basically steamroll all of them. Every other area, Fairness for All and Equality Act, have the same provisions. And we're speaking based on what we've seen in iteration after iteration of Fairness for All bills at the federal level and the state level. And the Equality Act, they both abolish men's and women's sports, or they both abolish women's sports. They basically both steamroll women's privacy, safety, and compromise conscience in the medical profession, forcing doctors to violate their faith when it comes to gender transition surgeries, and do not contain sufficient religious liberty exemptions to protect all individuals like Barronelle Stutzman and Jack Phillips, small business owners. They might have shades around this and claim to protect them with carve-outs, but based on the language we've seen, you don't have protection sufficient to protect a small business owner in every instance where they should be protected.
My take on the Fairness for All Act is that it does provide a veneer of protection for some religious institutions, but that's a truncated, limited view of the Constitution's First Amendment, because the First Amendment is for all Americans to have religious freedom. And what this does is says, okay, we're going to give, churches, these stated religious entities protection, but not Americans.
Right. It totally guts the idea that it's a right to be enjoyed in the public square by everyone. It says, well, if you're a Christian, you want to run a business as a Christian. No, you can't do that. That's not religious freedom, though. It's not just saying, well, a church can hire a minister according to his faith. If we're questioning that, in which, we, at some level, we are as a society, because, they're trying to pull those issues as well and work against churches' freedom. But we need to protect everyone's religious freedom, the small business owner as well as the church and religious school.
I mean, we've seen how that's unfolded thus far.
Yeah.
Where you've had Christian business owners that have been forced, and if they refuse to force, they've been fined, been driven out of business. So equipped with this Fairness for All Act, I mean, they become extinct.
They've already been fighting. Jack Phillips, Barronelle have gone to the Supreme Court multiple times. You have individuals like the owners of the Harris Funeral Home in Michigan who wanted to hire and run their business in accord with the distinctions between men and women and dress codes and gender identity. And they were steamrolled by the Bostock decision that we got from the court, right? So in some ways, this would only add fuel to the fire. And if people care about religious freedom, and thankfully many Americans still do, they need to pay attention to this kind of thing.
So we've established the fact that Fairness for All, folks, you can look at this. We have a publication on this.
We have a resource up at TonyPerkins.com. It compares Equality Act and Fairness for All. We have a lot of other resources on this too, but this one highlights the differences between the laws.
Okay, so you can take a look at that, folks. If you want to go to TonyPerkins.com and you can see what we're talking about here in black and white. But here's the reason we're talking about it, is that, as soon as I saw this survey, that 57% of Americans support this idea, this concept, that there are some on Capitol Hill that are going to be looking for a way to find cover as the media hammers away on this message, and they might be drawn toward the Freedom for All Act because they oppose the Equality Act.
They might, but the reality is that they need to understand these do not protect religious freedom. So if you're a member and you say, I want to protect religious freedom, well, you can't. These don't get the job done. And even this poll, as bad as it is, this poll found that 63% of respondents would vote for a member who supports religious freedom, while 57% by their own. We have issues with how they've done this, but even by their own methodology, 57% saying we want this compromise. So you still have people saying it's important that people protect religious freedom. And the key here is this doesn't do it.
Most of these surveys do not put out the fact that, okay, if you choose this, religious freedom is on very, very shaky ground. They don't tell you that.
Yeah, they don't. Well,
They just talk about, do you want to be a discriminator? Won't you support this, or do you want to kick people out on the street or deny them health care, which nobody wants to do.
Nobody's even talking about that.
And it's not happening.
Words being put in our mouth, or words being attributed to us, positions being attributed to us. Everyone is going to say the idea of outlawing discrimination and supporting religious liberty sounds nice. The problem is when you dig beneath the surface, and these
you're
bills
right.
are not doing
and
it.
I think here's a nobody really wants to hear this, but the reality is there is not space for both. Either we're going to have a vibrant First Amendment that allows religious freedom, or we're going to create an environment in which any type of sexual behavior is not only allowed but celebrated and defended by law. You can't have both.
You can't have both when you examine the decades of conflict culturally between the sexual revolution driving autonomy. These are autonomy doctrines, even in abortion and sexuality, driving those through the culture. They're not compatible with the faith that we're trying to protect in the public
when
square.
you uphold transcendent truth, historic truth as it comes to human sexuality, that is going to be seen as offensive by those who want to live without restraint.
And ultimately, these ideologies they come into conflict, and the autonomy one is trying to eliminate expression that would claim any moral stance.
And they want to use the power of government to do it.
That's what's going on with a lot of these efforts.
Yeah. So, folks, you need to be informed and involved. So the reason we're talking about this today is it's not a red alert at now. right at this moment, but we want you to be informed and be having these conversations with your members of Congress and even your state legislators about this, because I'm telling you, some are going to be attracted to the nice title, Fairness for All. Travis, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.